Welcome back to the Love Fashionably podcast. So thank you for joining me again this week. And I'm so excited to have you here. We're going to kind of jump right in for where we picked up last week. So if you're a bit confused, you just kind of randomly clicked on this episode and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So this podcast airs weekly on Monday nights at 7 p.m. And last week we started this conversation and this thought process of Jacob and Jacob's life. And that is where we're going to kind of pick up in the middle of his life. I will give a small recap if you don't have time to go back and listen to it. It is pretty quick, so you can just kind of sneak it in. But we know that Jacob here, we are picking up his life where he is on the run. So he has deceived his brother. He has deceived his father. And he's on the run for his life. And he had an encounter with God at a place, and he called the place Bethel. He set up a memorial, and he called the place Bethel. And let's pick up there because that's where we're going to end. And so we're going to kind of go back at the end of Genesis 28. And the verses are 11 through 19, but I'm going to kind of just pick up in the middle there. And it says that he goes there, and it's nighttime. He's taking a rest, and he's asleep. And God comes to him and he says, the ground you are lying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and the east, to the north and the south, and all the families of earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. Once more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. The next morning Jacob got up very early. He took the stone he had rested his head against, and he set it upright as a memorial pillar. He poured olive oil on it, and he named the place Bethel. And so we know that he had this, we talked about last time, he had this incredible encounter with God and how much that can relate to our lives. So again, check that one out. We know that he goes on, he gets married, and on his journey is where we're going to pick up several chapters later where he has gained 2 wives, he's gained incredible wealth, and he's on his way back. And he's kind of heading in the direction of going back and meeting his brother. But along the way, he sends the night before he's supposed to meet Esau. And if you want direction or history on that, go to the last podcast. But he sends his wives and his possessions and everything ahead of him. So he has this moment alone again at night. And in Genesis 32, 24 through 28, this left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn, ready to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. And so that very last line kind of gives us the clue that who he is wrestling with. He is wrestling with God. He has this another incredible encounter. So the first time he saw the stairwell, this time he is wrestling with God. And it's funny, this just caught my attention, and Jacob's like wrestling with him. It's because he doesn't know who he is, or he doesn't know who has come to him. But if he was, aware, then he would know he's already been blessed, because he says, I won't let you go unless you bless me. But we just saw several chapters before, he's already been blessed. God gave him the blessing already. He told him that he was going to have this numerous descendants, as the stars in the sky, the same blessing that he gave to Abraham, which is in his bloodline. It is his birthright. And then he goes on to say, what is your name? And that always is funny because he's wrestling with God, because God knows him. He knows his name, but he says Jacob. And in that moment, God changes his name from Jacob to Israel. And we talked about last time how Jacob means like supplanter. We also hear it as deceiver, and he names him Israel, and Israel means prince. And so he changes his whole identity in that one moment. And, you know, but we know, as Jacob does, that it can be hard to accept something that you don't feel like maybe you're not owed, but that you don't feel like you're worthy of. And so Jacob goes on and he has this amazing encounter, but he's still, as we're going to see, he's still identifying with Jacob. And the reason I love this so much, God changes names. So he's already done that with Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. So we've already seen God throughout history in Jacob's family. He's changing names and he's changing their identities. He's changing them into the people that God is, until, that the person that he has called them to be, and not who they are and who they are identifying themselves with. And so I love that. And I've talked about that before when I talked a little bit about Cinderella, how God is always changing names throughout history and changing our identities. And it's such a beautiful redemption story for us, and something that we have to remember, that we aren't who we think we are. Because a lot of the times what we think we are is what we see in the mirror, and we have to go to God's word to know who we are and who we truly are on the inside. That we have to find our identity in Christ, and that gives us the confidence to have for what we see in the mirror. But he has this encounter, and then he gets up the next day, and then he's got to go, and he has to go meet his brother Esau. So, for someone that has deceived and has taken a lot away from his family, from his brother, he's got to be really scared. Going back to see someone who he just thought was, he just destroyed his life. Just think of like if someone, like there was two people and one person just came and like took all of the person's money, took everything they had, and then just left. And then this person over here, a lot of the times what we would see if this was a movie playing out, there's going to be a lot of bitterness, a lot of anger. This person they were a hunter, so they are on the hunt, they are on the march, and they are like Jason Bourne it, about to go find their other brother or this other person. And so that's really kind of, I feel like, from what we see from Jacob's actions, that's really the story's playing out in his mind, because it says that when he sees Esau a long way off, he starts sending like all these possessions and all these things to his brother to kind of like smooth it out. Like, hey, I've gained some stuff for myself here. Why don't you take it all? Take back everything that I owe you, and here's all that you need. And it's such a fun picture when you see this, because it says that in the Passion translation, there's a footnote at the bottom, and it says, so like when Jacob's on his journey to visit his brother Esau, it says, once you have seen the face of God, the face of those who oppose you will no longer intimidate you. And we know that Jacob has seen the face of God. And I think we can see here from the response of Esau, he has too. Because when they finally meet in chapter 33, Esau runs to Jacob, which again, we see when I picture that and I hear that when Esau's running to Jacob, that story of the prodigal son in the New Testament, where the father is running to the son who was lost. Again, we can see it here in Genesis, where Esau is running to Jacob. He's like, I'm not mad at you. He's not running to kill him. He's not running with sword in hand. He's running with open arms to hug his long lost brother. And Jacob never needed to worry. He never needed to have the fear or the worry that he was carrying. He was carrying a burden that was never meant for him. But such a fun little redemptive story within Jacob's redemptive story of how God is working all throughout his life to try to show him who he really is, that you are not the deceiver, you're not the hill grabber, you are Israel. So after he meets his brother, they reconcile, they decide to go their separate ways, but everything is all good. It says that Jacob journeys on again and he finds himself heading back to Bethel. So, where we started in those first scriptures where God met him in a dream and he ended up saying that, God was in this place and I wasn't even aware of it. A lot has happened in Jacob's life. It says, we know it's about 20 to 30 years have happened. And he's ready to go back to the house of God, which is what Bethel means. And he's ready to go have that another encounter with God. Not that he hasn't had them. We've seen he's had them along the way, but it's just like, I don't know if you've ever had those in your life. You're like, if I could just get back to that place in my life. Like if you've been a Christian for a while and, you there's highs and lows and you can recall, like I know for me, oh, you like wish you could go back to like this certain time in your life. Or like a lot of the times for us, if you're around new Christians and you see their excitement and their joy, a lot of the times you're like, oh, I wish I could go back to that, because we know as we go on our journey, it's really hard to kind of carry that initial moment with us. We should always strive for it, but I know it's really hard to kind of carry that with us. But so he's going back. He's ready to go back to kind of have that other moment with God. And so in Genesis 35, verses 9 through 15, it says, now that Jacob has returned from Padan Aram, God appeared to him again at Bethel. God blessed him, saying, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob any longer. From now on, your name will be Israel. So God renamed him Israel. Then God said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. You will become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants, and I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give it to you and your descendants after you. Then God went up from the place where he had spoken to Jacob. Jacob set up a stone pillar to mark the place where God had spoken to him. Then he poured wine over it as an offering to God and anointed the pillar with olive oil. And Jacob called the place Bethel, which means house of God, because God had spoken to him there. It's funny to see when we read at the beginning, chapter 28 to 35, the parallels within the stories. God again is reminding him of the promise that he's given him, that you're going to be a great nation, that you're going to have many descendants. He told him that from the beginning, but we know that there's been a lot that's happened. And Jacob, I think to have that reminder must have meant that he needed it. God knew that he needed that reminder to remember who he was. Again, that, hey, you're no longer Jacob. Remember, I've already named you Israel. Why? Again, he said it twice back to back. From now on, your name will be Israel. So God renamed him Israel. Like, it's like, get it in your mind. Like, this is who you are. And again, gave him the promise, and then he set up the pillar again. And then again, just remember, it's the place of God. This is a place of God. So God was just reminding him, but so much had happened. And so many times I think that happens to us, that, God gives us the beginning of our story, or he'll give you some instructions on how to start, and you'll kind of start that journey, and then you encounter good things and then you encounter bad things. And then sometimes those bad things kind of get us to back off and we forget about the promise that God had originally given us. And sometimes we need to go back to those moments, to remember to go back to God, to go back to Bethel, to go have those encounters with God, to remember the promises and the words that God has spoken over our lives, whether it be something that he's told you, like he could have told you, like Jacob, he could have told you in a dream. He could have spoken to you in your heart. Or maybe you just need to go read the word of God and remember the promises that God has stated, because they're the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so this story kind of, as we wrap up here in 35 of Jacob's story, it does continue on, because we know that Jacob, he ends up having a lot of sons, but we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But Jacob, again, so that was in still chapter 35, but 19 through 15. Okay. So we kind of move on into the 18 to 21. He's still identifying himself as Jacob. Okay. He just had an encounter with God. God reminded him again of who he was, that he was no longer Jacob. But there's a moment that comes where, again, he encounters a tragedy. So in between those two verses, his wife that he loved, Rachel, the one that he wanted, the one that he stayed and worked extra for, she ends up having a child, but during childbirth, she dies. And that, of all the moments to really be angry and bitter, that could have been the moment for Jacob. But in verses 18 through 19, around where it occurs, and let me just, I have a clip of it, but I don't know why I didn't copy it all the way over. It doesn't look like, so let me pull that up really fast. Thankful for the Bible app. I had copied and pasted this over, but it didn't work. Give me a second here. Sometimes life happens, right? So later on, like I said, she has Benjamin. It says, so Rachel in verse 19. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to what's called Bethlehem. It says, so Jacob set up a stone monument over Rachel's grave, and it can be seen to this day. In another translation, it says that Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Israel moved on again and pitched his tent beyond, and then I don't know how to say that name, so but let's stick with what we're going with here. Jacob set up the pillar. Israel moved on. He encountered this really hard time, and he remembered who God had called him to be. And I love that. You see that subtle transition to where Jacob finally accepts the identity that God had given him. Jacob, he's no longer Jacob. Jacob set up the pillar to mourn the past, the thing that he loved, the thing that he wanted the most. And he says, but Israel moves on because Israel had so much more to do. And I think that's something that, for us can be hard. You sometimes have to let go of those really hard things. You have to let go of those things in life in order to move on and into the place or the promise that God has for you. We talked about, he went from Jacob, deceiver, to prince. I love that prince. Why prince? Because God renamed him prince. And, we know King Jesus, he is our king, prince, his son. So he grafted him into the royal family. And he said, you are not a deceiver. You are my prince. You are my, you are in my bloodline, which Jesus does come through his bloodline. Later on, you can see that and read that in the beginning of Matthew, I think it is the one that documents that. But we see that he is grafted into the bloodline and grafted in Romans 11. You can read all of Romans 11. I just picked out the verse 17, but it says, but some of the branches are from Abraham's tree. Some of the people of Israel have been broken off. You Gentiles, who were branches from a wild olive tree, have been grafted in. So now also receive the blessing God had promised Abraham and his children, sharing the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. There's a lot of things from what we have read there where that is through where we become saved and God grafts us into his family tree. So a Gentile is someone who was not a Jew. So, unless you're Jewish or have the Jewish bloodline, I don't. So I would be considered a Gentile, and I am grafted into the family tree. So I now have the same promise from Abraham, the promise of Israel, of Jacob, and then it says, I love from the rich nourishment of the olive tree. And it's funny that we saw that Jacob, every time he set up a pillar, what did he do to anoint that pillar before he moved on? He used olive oil. It's like God had a plan all from the beginning, that everything all kind of works together. But But just kind of to leave you with this one last thought, and it's probably the most profound thing that, and the thing that I love the most about Jacob's story, and the story of all of this that happens at the beginning in Genesis, which is, the Genesis is the beginning or is the foundation. And I talked about the Passion Translation. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, on the cover, it says Genesis, the first fruits. And it's talking about how, and, I think of these are our foundational blocks of our faith, of our salvation, things that we can go back to, things that have stood the test of time. And God, throughout all of eternity, something that has stood the test of time is he decided that he was going to align himself with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He aligns himself with Abraham, who was the father of our faith, Isaac, his son, who is the promise. So he's reminding us that, that your faith, your promise. And then he says Jacob. Now, we just did this whole 2 episodes on how God is trying to get Jacob to know that he is not Jacob, the deceiver, the bad side of him, that he is Israel, that he is the prince, that he is the good side of him. So it's always really funny about, and I heard this many years ago, and this always really stuck with me. So I did not come up with this on my own. I wish I had. God told someone else who I heard, and it was, so I'm sharing it with you. But wouldn't God want to be known if he's the God of faith and the God of promise? Wouldn't he want to be known as I'm the prince, you're a royal bloodline? But no, he chooses the bad side. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God of the side that you don't want anyone to know about, the deceiving side, the side that you've tried to run away from, the side that you try to hide from, that I can be the God of that side too, if you will allow me and invite me into those places in your life, because I have grace and I have renamed you Israel, and you are in my bloodline and my prince and our princess, if you will, and you are mine. And so I just love that beautiful redemptive story of Jacob. I think Jacob really gets a bad rep. I mean, I know growing up, I was like, oh, Jacob, you don't want to be Jacob. But as I've gotten older, as I have learned the story, listened more about the story, read more about the story and what God has shown me, I think I identified with Jacob probably a lot more than I really came to admit, that Jacob is a large part of me, and he might be a part of you too, to where there's things that we all need that redemptive story and that moment of, but God's always there waiting for us. So I hope that you enjoyed that and maybe learned something new. If you did, please put it in the comments below. I forgot I've wanted to jump right in at the beginning, but at the end, just to say a big thank you, as always, to BGTV Studios for being the host of this weekly podcast. They are a podcast network that has episodes that air all throughout the week on Facebook. I think they go on YouTube live too. So yes, I don't know why I always forget that. They are going live on both places. They do archive in both places, but the playlist I think is a little bit easier to find on YouTube. That's just me personally. I may just not know how to work Facebook right now. But anyway, so be sure, again, like, save, subscribe, all the things to BGTV Studios so that you never miss an episode of this podcast. But maybe you can also find some other ones. There's a lot that's happening, a lot being added. Just a little side note, it's probably already aired, but you can go check her out. So she was on our podcast earlier in December. Her podcast just launched, so be sure to check out Radiance Reserve podcast. That is new on the BGTV Studios as well. So we can support her too. But hope that you have a great week. Mondays are always difficult, but always exciting to have that over with. So hope that everything else goes well for you. We're now, when this airs, I should have done the dates in my head. I usually try to. I think this is going to be end of January or beginning of February, somewhere in there. So we've we made it through that transition of the month that never ends. So have a great week, and I will check you back. I will see you back here next Monday night. Bye.